computer. Okay, recording's in progress. All
Wonderful.
right, so shall we let it rip? Okay, well, I want to appreciate and thank you all for joining us. We're at over 100 participants, and it means the world to me that we can be here and share together today. So I want to tell a really quick story. First of all, my coworker, Mitzi Hathaway, came to me with this idea a couple of months ago. I reached out to Sally Bell at Tech Association of Oregon, and she said, I have a phenomenal speaker, Cortney McDermott. And so as we got together and started talking about how we really wanted to touch people's lives and make a difference, I was reminded of a story that I had completely forgotten about that took place in my life in 1984. At the time, I'd been married to my first husband. I was very, very poor. And we'd finally moved off the mountain into a house with running water and electricity. And I had a reliable car. And I worked about 6 miles into town. One day on my way home, it was a winter day. It was cold and snowy and icy. I heard a noise in my front wheel. And I said, what, it took like 30 seconds. I had been so anxious and so fearful of money for so long that it took about 30 seconds. And I got into this train where I said, you know what? That noise is going to be a car repair that I can't afford. I'm going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, I'm going to lose my house. And right about that time, I came over the hill and there was a river at the bottom of the road and I almost drove into the river. I got home and I looked for help and I ended up reaching out and getting some help that worked with me. And later that weekend, I found out what that noise was, and it was a rock in my hubcap. And so I almost killed myself over a rock in my hubcap. And so as we look at all of us going through these challenging times where we're overwhelmed, we're under-resourced, we crave our family and our friends, I just want to really reach out and say to you, today might just be the day that you find that resource that keeps you off the train and out of the creek. So with my great heartfelt appreciation, I want to give a shout out to Peace Health, who has come along and sponsored the speaker fee for Cortney to be here with us. It's so amazing that we came together with the healthcare and mental wellness to provide for our communities. We reached out across the state of Oregon to our other chambers of commerce who have helped us get the word out, because chambers champion a thriving community, and mental wellness is a big part of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sally and say thank you all for joining us. It's nice to know you're here, and I hope that you will enjoy it. We will be recording this, and it will be available again after this session's over. So with that, take it away, Sally.
Thanks, Bettina. Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Bell, and I'm Executive Vice President with the Technology Association of Oregon. And I have the great fortune of partnering with Bettina on many regional initiatives. And when she came to me, I said, I do have an amazing speaker in mind. And so I just want to thank you for the partnership on this program. I think it's incredibly timely. I'm really excited for Cortney's content. And so allow me to introduce our speaker and give you a little bit of a taste of her background, and then we'll turn the mic over to her. And so Cortney and I have been friends and colleagues for the last 12 years. So it's been quite a journey and really fun to continue to work with her in these capacities and bring her here to you live here on this Zoom. So Cortney McDermott is a best-selling author. She's done TEDx speaking, and she has more in the pipeline, which is exciting. She's an expert in the field of human potential, and her work has been featured all over the place, everything from Inc. to Women's Health, Success, the Huffington Post, Fox News, and most major other business and lifestyle media. She started her career as a temp secretary and worked her way up to a VP. And before leaving her elite corporate job to start her own business, she's worked with clients and audiences all over the globe, including Universal Music Group, Google, Nike, Starbucks, the US military, and NASA, maybe some of you in the future. But today we're lucky enough to have her here with us, and she's going to take us on this journey from anxiety into peace. We invite you to let go of any notion of how you might have approached this and just be open-minded to this experience. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to her. Thanks so much for being here, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Bettina. Thank you for sharing your story, Bettina. It's really, really inspiring. And that's how this whole thing got started and how we got together on this and really rallied, and Sally for bringing us all together. And I really want to thank as well the Chamber of Commerce and on the 85 plus chambers of commerce that have supported this, and Peace Health. And of course, everyone who's tuning in. I mean, you're the reason why this happened in the first place. So I really want to say thank you from the top, bottom, and middle of my heart for being here. And I want to start by giving you really an invitation to be present, to become really fully present. And I don't know if is my screen showing up as the main screen now? Okay, because I'm not seeing it that way. So I just want to make sure. Okay. So I want to start with this invitation to get present. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we're living in kind of a mecca of distraction. So if you are watching this on your phone, you might even want to put your phone down if you get a lot of notifications and just listen to the content. You might want to, if you're on your computer, kind of hide your phone. I do that all the time. I hide it and then I can't find it anymore. You might want to do whatever it is that you need to do to just be fully here right now, including taking, thank you, Flor, including taking a deep breath just to really get centered. So if we could do that and just take a collective breath together and just let it out with a sigh. There's no agenda. It's not anything that you need to do here. It's just, let's just be together and discover some things. Okay. So thank you. Thank you very, very much for joining me in that invitation to get more present and also pleasant, because when we're more present, we are more pleasant. I want to start by telling you about this story, this plane story that happened to me in an airplane back in May. So I was leaving for an international trip. It was the first time actually that I had traveled since the pandemic. And I live in Italy. For those of you who didn't notice that, I live mostly based in Italy, in the north of Italy. And I am about to take off for this trip. And 2 days before I'm leaving, I realized that my US passport is expired. Now, a previous version of me would have really, really freaked out at that. And I would have tried to do anything in my power to make it happen, to make that trip happen, to get on that plane. I would have called the embassy. I would have done all sorts of things. And my mind did momentarily go to all of the possibilities of being able to do that. And as I ran through those possibilities in my head, I just kept hearing, just relax, just relax. And I know sometimes we don't hear that. We get in that spin of we have to do something, we have to figure it out. And I was going in and out of that spin, but I decided to kind of follow this voice. And I'm gonna explain a little bit more about how I did that and how I got to that place. But what I intuited was that I'm just gonna go to the airport and see what happens. So I go to the airport in Italy with an expired passport. I did have an Italian passport. And I went up to the check-in counter and the woman says to me, okay, I'm sorry, but you cannot travel to the US on an expired US passport. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, I thought this might happen, but I say, well, is there anything that can be done? And she leaves, she tells me she's gonna leave the check-in counter to check in with her supervisor, but she doesn't think that I can travel to the States on an Italian passport. So she leaves. And in that moment, I went ahead and just closed my eyes, as I asked you to a moment ago, and I set an intention. I was kind of a prayer, actually. And what I prayed for, what I intended was not that things would go my way. What I prayed for, or what I intended, was that when the flight attendant came back, that whatever it was that she was going to tell me that I had to do, that I was going to be at complete peace with it, that it was going to be perfect, that I may not know why it was perfect, but that it would be perfect. And so when she came back, and she came back to me, and I look at, and I just opened my eyes, and she's in front of me, and she says, okay, do you have any other form of documentation that proves that you're a current US citizen? And I go through my things and I realize I have this piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper with my known traveler number in the US, and it's valid for a few more years. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, will she accept this piece of paper? So I hand her this piece of paper, and that, along with my driver's license, she says, well, maybe this might work. So she goes back. And again, as she's back there, I'm feeling this peace taking over, that even if I have to go back home, even if I don't get to go on this trip and I don't get to do the talks that I had planned to give, and I don't get to see my family who I hadn't seen in a while, that I would know that that was perfect as that was. And so when she came back, she actually said, yes, you can go, this is going to work. And I'm thinking, okay, wow. She said, we took a photocopy and we're going to let you on the plane. So I get on the plane, then I get to Paris. And there's the same show and dance in Paris, or I don't know if we say dance and show and dance, but anyway, there's the same ordeal. I get there, and the man who I'm going through security, and he's wondering why I don't have a valid US passport. And again, I just relax into that moment. And what happened was almost astonishing, because first he was telling me off in French, and next thing I know, he was letting me go. He was letting me go on the plane. And then I get to the US. Okay. And you know, anyone's listening, and most of you are from the US, so you know how our border police are. They're serious business. And I'm coming in and I'm thinking, okay, after, I don't know, 15 hours traveling, I'm going through border control, and the officer says to me, he looks at the passport and he tries to run it through the system, and it's not working. And he leaves his cubicle. He says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, wait here a moment." And I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't this be funny if my moment of seeing if I'm really truly at peace comes all the way over here? You know, if I have to go back, or I have to stay and detained somewhere, I had no idea what was going to happen. So as this is going on, I'm thinking, all right, Court, there we go. Are you going to choose? Are you going to choose peace, or are you going to choose what you've chosen your entire life, which is to feel anxious and to think you need to say something, or you need to do something, or you need to somehow figure this out? Which one are you going to choose? And in that moment, luckily, I was really able to choose that peace. And I don't know how this happened, this next part of the story, but that officer came back and he said to me, "Okay, ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but I'm inserting your information manually, and it's no problem, and welcome home." And I've always loved that when they tell me welcome home, when they say welcome home, I love those words when they say that to me. So I just got really excited, and I thought, wow, this peace stuff really works. And at the time I didn't call it peace stuff. I'm calling it that for the purposes of today, but it was really just settling into the knowing that everything is happening for us. I'm going to repeat that. It's settling into the knowing that everything is happening for us. So I want to explain to you a little bit some of the lessons I learned, and also how I got there, how I got to this place. Because like I said, I used to be a very anxious person. And most of the time people look at me and think that's not possible, but that is very much possible. And I still get moments where I feel anxious about things. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But what happened for me, at least, what I went and what I understood through all of my learnings, and you know, I study a lot in different fields in science, in spirit, and then I love to tell stories. So that all kind of culminated for me in certain understandings that I want to share. The first one was the understanding about our environment. So I used to think, you know, Einstein once said that the environment is the sole governing agency of the particle. And I used to think that what that meant was that your external environment was determining who you became, right? And even though we have countless stories of people who have overcome that external environment, for me, that meant, if you're looking at it from a scientific, it meant, okay, my external environment is going to be signaling my genes in a specific way. We know that's true. It's going to be signaling my autonomic nervous system in a certain way. It's going to be signaling all of my responses in a certain way, right? Hence, it's going to predetermine or determine how I'm showing up, right? So that was my understanding of it, until I came to a much deeper understanding of what Einstein was talking about, which is that you also have an inner environment. And the problem is that most of the time, most of us are not cultivating that inner environment. We're not going inward. We are actually most of the time looking somewhere outside for our answers. And, you know, I was interviewed yesterday, a great interview, this guy named Rob, fantastic guy out of Oregon, Eugene. And he says to me, he says something about this, asking about success stories. So I want to get back to that, but he was talking about this, you know, your inner environment and how do you start to cultivate that. So what I did, at least in my case, and what I've done working with a lot of different people, is actually something that we're doing anyway all the time, which is brainwashing ourselves. So we're either consciously doing that or we're unconsciously doing that. In other words, we're either allowing ourselves to be brainwashed by a lot of different mechanisms and things that we use throughout the day, whether that be email, whether that be social media, whether that be even a well-intentioned book. And actually, this is one of the reasons I was bringing up the interview, is because Rob asked me, well, what makes my work different? And I said, well, I don't have your answers, but you do have your answers. And if you will start to uncover those answers and start to brainwash yourself a little bit in that direction, I'm going to talk a little bit more in a second about what I mean, then you will become that. Because one of the things that we need to understand here is that the universe doesn't give us what we want. It gives us who we are. It gives us who we're becoming. So as you start to get this thing about the environment signaling the gene and having the external environment, yes, that's signaling, but also your inner environment, which one do you think you have more control over? I just would love to see in the chat too. I've seen some things come up in the chat, but which of these do you think you have the most control over? Inner environment, I'm seeing from Joya. Thank you. I love these comments, by the way. Inner, exactly, right? Because lots of times we think, thank you. I love this. I love how everyone's chiming in here. Exactly. So you get it. See, you get it. You get that it's, and this is true. I get a really important one. We're going to come back to this, Raylan. Thank you. Depending on the traumas that you've experienced, we're going to come back to that. Thank you, Isabella. Oh, the universe gives me who we are. Yes. Okay, so your inner environment. The fact is, even if you've suffered traumas, and I personally have in many in my life, and even if that's happened, you still have more control over what's happening internally. You still have more control over what you're telling yourself and what you're allowing yourself. And I know that's really hard work. Trust me, do I know how hard it is to change that inner dialogue, but it's part of the process of becoming more and more who you want to be. And I'm going to explain to you how you do that. So there's a couple of things that we really need to pay attention to when we're brainwashing ourselves, when we're deciding a new program and a new way of being. And one of those is the times of days where we're doing this work. Okay, because lots of times, and also how we're managing our day-to-day, right? Because most of us show up every single day. It's actually quite fascinating. You could, for most people, take a video of how they go through their day every single day. You could do that for a year, maybe even 10 years, and then you could superimpose those videos and you would actually see the person doing the same thing every single day. You could superimpose them and it would look like the same video for most people. So really switching things up and understanding certain mechanisms about how your mind works. So when you work with things like brainwashing, which in other words just means really kind of sending a message to yourself over and over again until it sticks, until it becomes the predominant message. And if you look at specifically certain times of the day where you do that, okay, where you do or do not do that. So most people, when they wake up, they're checking their phone. Now, because of the different brainwave frequencies that you're moving through as you wake up and you go to sleep, that's actually the time where you're most suggestible. So one of the things I want to explain about my experience was that I use those times of the day, and my clients do as well. We use those times, the very first moments and the very last moments. Why? Because you're moving out of, for example, if you're going to sleep, you're moving out of beta, you're going into alpha, theta, delta, in these states where it becomes much easier for you to start signaling yourself in a different way, signaling your body, signaling your cells in a different way. So it's really important to pay attention to those times of day and really use them to start to brainwash a new message, or even just feel into your vision, into who it is that you're becoming and who it is you want to become. And in that way, it's also a great thing to work with something called auto-suggestion, which is really, again, you telling yourself and reminding yourself through different prompts and things that you have around that this is possible. Now, I know sometimes it seems like, oh, okay, it's not enough. I've tried that before and and I can hear that, right? But the only choice that we have, if we start in with that dialogue of, oh, I've tried this, or it's too much, or all of that, really, again, we're using that superpower we have of the one thing we control, which is to say, I'm going to see if I can just do this differently, a little bit at a time. And each one is a victory. Each time we do that, it's a little victory. And all those victories really add up. Again, going back to my own story, I was very anxious. And even now, sometimes when I get into that place, I have to catch it right away. Oh gosh, I'm getting to that place. And the minute I catch it, I remind myself of who I actually want to be, how I want to show up. And like I said, it's not easy, but it's actually quite simple. And it's a lot simpler than a lot of the other things that we're hearing out there, like wake up at 5 a.m. and do 10 different meditations. No, this is really just an awareness, and it's going inward. And all of that point about, that you were all echoing that inner, I love that someone wrote inner winner. That's exactly where this starts to happen. And I'll tell you another thing that's really important. I met someone beautiful yesterday. I'm going to call her Flower. And this woman had a beautiful vision for herself. And she asked me this question because we were talking, and someone came in, someone who had really created some issues for her, some trauma for her in her life. And she was in such an expansive place when this person came into the room. And then this person came in and it was just like, boom. So going back to that point also about trauma, right? And I said to her, I said, well, wait, can you just, even not closing your eyes, but go back to that vision that you were holding before. Go back to what you saw for yourself. Go back to that exciting probability outcome that you sensed in the field. Can you go back to that for a second? And the minute I suggested that, her whole body lit up again, and she was opening up again. And that's our job. Actually, I think that's really our own job, is to realign with the truth of who we are whenever we sense we're getting out of alignment. In other words, we're getting into a state of anxiety. We dismiss ourselves for a second. We do whatever we have to do to step back in. And that doesn't mean, again, tools and tricks and all that stuff. It really just means feeling what's possible for you. So I'm going to get back into that in just a moment, because I want to wrap up this part about the environment and this inner environment being so important. But I also want to talk about the second component of what made this possible for me to make these shifts, and what I think makes it possible for most people. Because they're really just mainly these two things. There's a lot of other science. We'll get into that probably in the Q&A. But the second most important thing is that I stopped wishing for things to go my way. I stopped believing that it had to be this one way. And when I did that, when I relinquished that control, when I relaxed into other possibilities, magic started to happen everywhere. And I was actually having this conversation with this woman, Flower, and she said the same thing. It's just like she was feeling the magic instantaneously, because she just relaxed into the fact that, yeah, this is what's in front of me, but there's all this possibility there that I wasn't seeing, because I was just sort of going in the same habits and the same thought patterns and just not catching myself. And the minute she started catching herself, she was quick. She was a quick learner. And I think a lot of people who are on here are very quick learners. Probably all of you, actually, if you're here and still listening up to this point, is she just got it. And the minute she got it, like I said, you could feel her whole energy just opening up and changing and shifting real time, that moment. It didn't take 1,000 things. It didn't take going, like I said, doing 10 meditations in a row, although that's great too. But it didn't take all of that. It just took her tapping into the truth of who she was and the truth of what she knew she wanted for herself. So I want to tell you one last little story and wrap up with the thing that I think is the most important thing, that if you take this one thing away, just this one thing from everything we've said, that it will dramatically change your life. And it's tied into everything we've already talked about. But I want to tell you one more story. And it is the story about a 13-year-old girl who gives birth to a baby girl. And she didn't, the father leaves right away. She doesn't have any relationship with him. The daughter is basically turned over to her grandmother because her mother wasn't really able to take care of her. She was abused sexually multiple times by men that were going in and out of their lives. And by the time she herself was 13, she got pregnant. She gave birth to a stillborn child. At that point, she went a little mental. It's kind of amazing that she didn't go completely mental before that. She was put into a mental institution at that point in her life. Luckily, she got out of that mental institution because they didn't have enough beds. And when she was claimed out of that mental institution, she was claimed by a man who said he was her father, who she had never seen before in her life. Now, in the chat, I would love to know if any of you can guess who this woman is. Anyone know? Not seeing anyone chime in here. Anyone have an idea? Oprah. Is it you? No, it's not me. It's Oprah. It's Oprah. Oh, Mother Teresa, love it. Love it. Yes, it's Oprah. Yes. This story is one of thousands of stories that I can tell that prove that our external environment, what people think about you, what people say about you, what people believe about you, is not the truth of who you are. It is just not the truth of who you are. I'm living proof of that. My life is a proof of that. My clients, but not just my clients, everyone you get a chance to touch. And trust me, as you go out and you live this, you will touch everyone. It's like Anne Lamott said in her book, lighthouses don't chase along the island looking for people to save. They just stand there shining. And the more you get this, and you are getting it, you will get this, the more you understand these base concepts. And this one last thing that I want to leave you with, the more you will be able to stand there shining, becoming a beacon for everyone else, because that's what you're here to do. And that's actually why you joined today. That's why you were called to this information and called to this moment. And I feel so, so grateful that you were and that you're here with me. And this one last thing I want to share, this one last thing, is this trust. Just one takeaway, trust. I promise you, the more you actually relax into trusting. And the ironic thing about this, what I'm talking about, is that we do this with 99.9999999 some odd percent of what's going on. You know, you're trusting right in this very moment that the trillions of biochemical reactions occurring in your body are going to continue to do their job, that they're going to continue to coordinate themselves amongst each other so that everything stays perfect. And the minute they don't, actually, the minute they stop doing that, you might talk to a doctor, and then you're trusting the doctor. You know, or a lot of you probably on this call are doctors. So, you know, maybe you're going to go to some other specialists. But the point that I'm making is that we have to relax into that trust, because we wouldn't even be able to live if we didn't relax into that trust. So what I'm suggesting today is that the 0.00000 whatever 1% that you believe is actually something that you have to manipulate, control, make it happen. Like me going to the airport. If I had gone to that airport, like, look, I need to get to the States. What do you think the outcome would have been? I think I wouldn't have been on that plane. I don't know about any of you, but I think I wouldn't have gotten on that plane. Yes, Anne Lamott, thank you. Anne Lamott, and the book is Bird by Bird. I'll go back to the chat. I love that you're all chiming in, and I'm trying to catch some of your comments. So we'll go back to this also when we get into Q&A. But this point that I want to make is just turn that last 0.0000001% over to whatever you want to call that source, that force. I call it God, but you call it however you please. That force that is aligning everything for you perfectly. And the moment you actually decide with that last bit of percentage to align yourself to it, I promise you, I absolutely promise you, your life will change radically. And you will start to see that there is magic in every corner. And I have to go back for a moment to this woman. And again, I'm going to call her Flower, because I don't want to give her name, but this beautiful Flower that I met yesterday, and she just got it. She got it in an instant. And you know what? You can get it in an instant. You can get it right now. You can get that. You know what? The time has come. The time has come for me to stop playing small. And the time has come for me to play full out, play who I am, and just doesn't matter, because the minute you start doing it, you're going to move into harmony with everything, and you're going to move into harmony with that force, and you will be able to trust more and more, and your life will absolutely change. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope to be able to answer as many of your questions as we can before we hop off. And again, thank you so much to Sally and Bettina and everyone for making this happen.
Thank you, Courtney. So we're going to have about 30 minutes for Q&A, and we have some scripted questions, which will kind of like get into some of the juicy stuff, but I highly encourage folks to also put questions in the chat, and I'll be noting those, and we'll get to those in a little bit. And thanks for being such an engaged audience here on the chat. It's hard to not see everybody when we're in webinar format, so I'm envisioning you all. Okay, so let's talk about being well-resourced, because Bettina mentioned that in the intro. I know you talk about it a lot, Courtney, but like, what does that really mean? You know, how does it look different for people?
So I personally believe that we look at that for the most part, when I hear well-resourced, it kind of, part of me sort of does this a little bit most of the time, not anymore, but I was doing that because I was thinking so many people, especially, I see this especially in women, believe that they have to do all the things. Like, I've got to make sure that I'm doing every single thing. And it gets to a point where you feel like it's almost disturbing the minute you hear take care of yourself or self-care or whatever, because you're like, I'm doing all the things, but I'm feeling even more flustered than before I was doing them. And for me, what I started to understand is that being well-resourced was not about doing all the things. It wasn't about having all the tools and the tricks and everything. Being well-resourced was actually resourcing that knowing within you that allows you to go through your day in the ways that, you know, we're talking about, where you can move through much more instinctively and feel like, oh yes, this thing feels right. And I would really encourage anyone listening, what really feels good to you? As I was disassociated from this for a long time. Like, I didn't really know, okay, what is it that would feel good to me? And I had to start exploring and remembering what felt good to me when I was little. Like, I love to sing. I love to sing. And earlier today, I was going through a moment. I was by my brother, who's awesome, who is a person I absolutely adore to all the galaxies. And he was on the phone. He was kind of pacing around. I started to feel a little bit anxious. So I went to the bathroom and I started singing La Vie en Rose. And I'm just like there in the bathroom and I'm belting it out. And my brother's like, I was talking to a client and you're just belting out this song. And I'm like, oh, but it helps me, right? So understanding what are the things that really help you. Like for me, getting out in nature is really important, but you need to understand it's not going to ever be what somebody else tells you to do. So people are always looking to say, oh, this person, tells me there's this 5-step plan. I'd be a little hesitant about those things. If it really resonates with you and you hear something and you say, wow, that thing that I remember, that reminds me of something. reminds me of a quote I shared yesterday from Ram Dass, aka Richard Alpert, who was a famous Harvard professor, taught at Harvard and Cal State and some other universities. He had a whole empire. And he said, I'm not going to teach you anything you don't already know, but the perplexing problem is you don't know you know. So really this thing that we're living is just remembering, remembrare, put the pieces back together, remember what works for you, remember what brings you back to that sense of wholeness and peace. Because wholeness and peace, I mean, it's the same, it's the same word, basically. It's like when you're in wholeness, you feel that peace. So remember what it is that inspires that in you slowly. At first, might take a bit, and then just follow that, listen to it. We've gotten some great comments here. Sal, I don't know if that completely answers your question. And
Well, I think that's great. I think, you know, and part of the impetus for this program too with Bettina was just that, you know, our world has changed so much in the last 2 years. You know, myself, I'm a working parent, and, you know, it's a hard question to ask what feels right. Like, what feels right this year, this day? Certainly different answer to that question than it even was 2 years ago or even a year ago. So just like recalibrating for this time and this moment and our existence in that feels like a really grounding notion. So let's talk a little bit about brain science, Cortney, which I know is one of your favorite topics, and you've been recently at a conference more on like what's going on in the brain. So I'm curious, like when we're using breath work or meditation, like what's really happening from like a brain chemistry perspective, and why is it so important as a tool?
great. So most of the time, most of us are operating in beta. And beta is, I want you to think of it, the best way I've ever heard it described is like having 4 gears on a race car, right? So you got these 4 gears, you've got this really impressive machinery, right? Piece of machinery. And beta would be like being in first gear and trying to get everywhere you're going by just exhausting yourself essentially and wreaking havoc on those systems. So most of us are in beta, and there are different levels of beta. You could be in low beta, you can be in high beta where you're completely stressed out. Now, you've noticed this, right? That those moments where you're very stressed and that's when you're in high beta, somehow the things just don't work out. They don't happen. It takes so much longer, right, to do something when you're in that space. And everyone knows what that feels like. So that's beta, that's the first gear. When you start to relax and you do something that allows you to relax, or even just you step away from what's currently stressing you out, you just step away, your brain will naturally start to shift into maybe low beta and potentially even alpha, depending on what it is that you're doing. Like I know for a lot of people, it's just as simple as getting outside. I know it's that way for you, Sal. It's just like, I got to get outside. I got to get my trainers on and get outside. And when that happens, you're getting into alpha. And what alpha is really it's a great place to start accessing more of your creativity, because as soon as you start to access alpha, you're releasing serotonin, which is a really fabulous neurotransmitter into your body. You're just getting in that you're getting into more of your groove. As you go deeper into different brainwave frequencies, you start to move into theta, and theta is where you start to release catecholamines, which you also potentially start to release earlier. And those are vital for learning and memory and retention and just getting all of those, again, third gear. Think of it as third gear. There's so much that you're able to do, but you don't even necessarily realize, you're not as aware. It's like those times that you sit down to do something, you go, oh my God, I finished that so quickly, right? Has that happened to people who are listening, who are watching? Does that happen to you where it's just time went by, you didn't even notice it, right? That's when you're in theta. Then you move into delta. If we're doing this naturally, by the way, as I said, at least twice a day. So you're doing it when you wake up in the opposite direction, you're coming out of delta. And delta, by the way, is where you're releasing human growth hormone. It's where you're using, essentially. That's why people talk about, getting sleep, is because we're doing these things. Our body's naturally doing these things for us. And when we get into places where we say, oh, I can't do that, I can't give the time for that. Well, what happens is we essentially start to age. And I don't mean, I love aging, but I mean aging in a way that doesn't suit us very well. So again, it's not even necessarily about getting a lot of sleep. You can go through these brainwave frequencies, and I do in people I work with do. You can access these brainwave frequencies even while with your eyes wide open. Some people say to me, well, do you have to meditate? And I say, well, I'm meditating right now, because meditating is just being there. It's just being fully present. And you start to access these different frequencies. And I think it really is important for people to start getting some of these base understandings of how they do that, how you're able to do that. And again, breath work is a great way. Getting outside is a great way. And again, just paying attention to those times that I'm feeling really relaxed, because again, those are also the times where you're going to be able to get messages through. So if you think about most people, when they're really relaxed, they're listening to something that maybe they don't want to come through, or they're watching some show that they don't actually want to be programmed by, right? But that's when they're allowing themselves to relax. So can you take those moments instead to actually start imprinting your mind and your body with some of these other messages? So it's a little bit of the neuroscience. I mean, we could go really far on that note. So I don't know if there's any more that you want to hear, because I love that stuff. You know, I'm a science nerd, so really love it.
Yeah, on that topic, there was a specific question in the chat box about like how do you really get from beta to alpha, or how do you know when you are transitioning?
Oh, okay, that's really good. So from when you are moving from beta to alpha, one of the things, so there's two parts to that question, right? How do you know and how do you do it? Are those the two parts to the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So practicing, because again, we're doing this naturally. So even if I'll give you the best way for you to understand how to do it is to sit yourself up in bed at night as you're falling asleep. Before you fall asleep, sit yourself up in bed. And maybe before you do this, it'd be really helpful. And there's a reason why this is suggested in so many success books, is to have an image or have a note about something it is that you are creating right now, that you're wanting to create right now, having that in front of you, and then just allowing yourself to relax, but sitting up. So you're not falling asleep, you're sitting up. Maybe you don't even do this in bed, maybe you do it on the couch, but when you're really tired, when you do that, when you start to do that, you will be moving from beta to alpha. And if you get good at just, not even good at it, you just start paying attention. All you have to do is pay attention. Our attention is a superpower. We can talk more about that because that's also fascinating. It gets into some of the science, but really as you're falling into that state, or even as you're waking up, you'll feel it. You'll feel the difference. And you know what? If you do this enough, even if you do it for just a few days, you'll start to get some creative insights, because that part of you wants to share with you. It wants to share. It wants you to grow. It wants you to excel. But the only problem is we're not giving it enough space. We've got so much noise. We're crowded from the moment we get up to the moment we go to sleep. And all I'm suggesting is take away some of that noise. Take away a little bit of that noise and start instead with your own priorities. Like I heard email described once, and I don't think it's just email, social media, all sorts of things, as a great organizing mechanism for other people's priorities, right? So what if instead of listening to those things or watching those things right before you go to bed, you actually took a look at something that you have, and you're naturally gonna go into those different brainwave frequencies. The more you do this, the more you're gonna start accessing information. And that's just the way it works, because that's just the way our minds and our bodies work together instead of working in a way that's in disharmony. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. So while we're on the topic of tools and practices, there was a question that came into the chat from Linda, who was relaying that her granddaughter is really struggling, and she's really trying to help her with tools, but she's also just spinning. And I know, Cortney, you're not a therapist, but in terms of your methodology and experience, like how do you work with people who are really caught in just constant spinning, spiraling? And how can you really, what are the leverage points so that people can simply implement tools?
Okay, yes. Well, first, I think we have to be careful with the tools. And this is why I was saying earlier, people are very well intentioned. So they want to give us all these tools and these things that we can do. But what we've been talking about today aren't the tools. What we've been talking about is the toolbox. So a lot of people start taking these tools and they're like, but they don't really have. And I remember once someone I really admire was doing some work around my place and had these tools and was like, is there a tool belt? And I was like, no. And it was like, okay, well then every time you have to keep going back, and it's like, it's not, you need the tool belt. You need the tool belt. So what we've been talking about actually are these things that hold it all together. The trust thing is holding it together. Even Linda, thank you so much for your comment, and thank you for bringing this up, because this is it's really beautiful to be able to share and open up about things that are really painful and hard for us, and to be open to some suggestions. And the reason why I was talking about trust is that trust piece, that's the toolbox. That's the thing that will actually hold the tools. If we don't have that and we're saying, I don't know, meditate or take this thing to calm your nerves or whatever it is, we're sort of missing the cohesive glue that can hold that together and that it can allow that to work. And so that's why we were talking about principles today. And I think even, and this is so hard, this is the hardest thing we can do. This is so hard, what I'm about to say, because while we might be able to learn how to apply that trust for ourselves, it's a whole nother level to apply that trust and that faith that everything is perfect for that, for your granddaughter, for example. That is way, way, way more difficult. And I know how difficult that is what I'm asking, because we think we want to, because we're so empathetic and because we love each other, we want to help. We want to say, do this because then you'll feel better. But most of the time, from my experience, and again, as Sally noted, I am not a psychologist, but this is just what I've seen, even in my own life and where people have, maybe tried to help me when I wasn't ready for it, is that lots of times it just made me feel like I was inadequate. I couldn't get there. I couldn't follow the tool. I wasn't able to do it. And the reason I wasn't able to do it is because I wasn't ready to do it. And so if the people that we love, if we can actually say, I trust, even for them, that what they're going through is actually perfect for them. And I know that's so hard, but there's even a line that I love from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, he who teaches one who does not wish to learn is performing an immoral act. And besides, they can't hear you anyway. And lots of times we do that with our loved ones. We want to teach them, we want to share all the tools we know and everything. But the problem is they're not ready. And actually what I've seen from my own life is that the only way that people transform around us is actually when we transform and we stand there shining as that light, and we just trust, and we allow them to learn how to trust just from our example. We set this beautiful example of I don't want to say surrender, because I think a lot of times that word can be very heavy for people because it feels like giving up, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's not a giving up. It's a relaxing into the knowing that this experience is perfect. And we can't understand that. Like, look at Oprah, look at that example of this 13-year-old child. There's no way you would say, if you knew her at 13, that you would say, oh, this woman's going to go on to be the most influential woman in the world. No way. No way would anybody have said. I mean, I don't know. Would anybody have joined said that? No, but she needed all of that adversity. When I look back now at the adversity and the struggles and the difficulties I had in my life, I'm like, whoa, thank goodness I had all those, because those made me who I am. And they brought me to a place that I was able to do what I do. And then of course, like I said, we can stand there shining for people and loving them through their difficulties, loving them, seeing them as they are. And especially with someone like your granddaughter, that is the easiest thing to do, because you're like, oh, I see you. You're right there. You're in there. You're right there. I feel you. I see you. And I'm here for you, whatever you need. And then the rest you turn over to that source, that force. Again, however you want to call it. Doesn't matter what you call that thing that beats your heart and sends all the blood to your vital organs and conducts all the things that it does for you, sends the electrical impulses down to your feet so you can put one foot in front of another and take those steps. The important thing is that you say, I trust that there is something greater at work here. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you want. I want to make sure we get to some other questions. I hope that served you, Linda, and thank you so much for asking that question. It's a beautiful, beautiful question.
Thanks, Courtney. There have been some other asks in the chat for you to relay some quotes, and I think that we could have the opportunity to follow up with folks after the session where they could actually have the written quotes in an email. So sure. Folks, we'll work with Courtney to get those quotes, because I think they are really powerful. They're almost like mantras in and of themselves. Okay, so a few other questions here. Let's talk about just like trends that we're all seeing and feeling, whether it's like workplace or family life. Multitasking is one that comes up a lot. And I think it's like a female superpower, but it's also can become quite a burden over time and lead to burnout. How do you view multitasking, Courtney? Like what do we do with this as women and folks who are responsible for maintaining sanity?
Yeah, there was speaking of quotes, I'll try to find it. There was a really great one by Ariana Huffington a while back. Oh yes, she said, you think you're being efficient, but really you're being stupid. And she just really called it out. And this is coming from a woman who was like the queen of multitasking until she was like, that is not where it's at. And I'm leading this life I'm so frustrated. And I am not, she tells her story. I can't recall now, but she tells her story about how she basically just went into complete burnout. And I wouldn't say that it's stupid to multitask by any means, but I like the fact that she went straight to the fact that there's a lot of science behind this, actually, that our brain is not actually doing things simultaneously. Like, we're not actually doing all those things simultaneously like we might think. What we're doing is we're actually going very, very rapidly at a pace that is kind of mind-blowing, actually, between one thing and another thing. But what's the problem with that? The problem with that, thank you so much, Norma. The problem with that is that as we're doing that, see, I just did it, but I love it's hilarious, right? But as we're doing that, our attention is fragmented. And when your attention is fragmented, your results are going to be fragmented. Because the way that our attention works, our attention is actually it's the most powerful asset we have. Where you're placing your attention is where you're placing all of your energy, right? And when you're placing your energy there, you are creating something. That's just how we're designed. We're designed to create through attention and intention as well. And if you look at this, even from a scientific perspective, there's a great concept in quantum physics that's jokingly called a wavicle. And the idea is that a particle is a wave at the same time. It's a wave up until the point of observation, i.e. attention, at which point it transforms into a particle. In other words, you could be looking at quantum and material, and you could take your attention off of it and it would move into a wave function. So it's no longer solid in any way. What does this mean? This means that the moment we put our undivided attention on something, it's a little bit like a laser beam. You put your undivided attention on it, you're going to get to it a lot faster. Plus, you're going to be moving into those brainwave frequencies that we talked about earlier with much greater rapidity and ease, because you're going to be saying, okay, a timeout. So the way I do this for myself, I have a lot of creative projects that I do. And what I do is when I'm focusing on any one of them, I don't give them all of this time necessarily, depending on how quickly I need to release them, but I don't necessarily say, okay, I'm going to spend an entire day, although I have done that sometimes on certain creative projects. But what I do is I give myself that time, and it's my attention is undivided and my intention is very clear. Where do I want to go with this? What is it that I'm trying to create? Now, that doesn't mean that the outcome is always exactly how I perceived it to be, because most of the time it's much better. Because we don't get to choose. We don't get to choose how things are going to turn out, but we do get to choose how we turn out, how we show up, and how we, turn ourselves into something. So for me, I take that time, and I turn, one of the things that I do consistently is I turn data off my phone, which means that I can get phone calls. So, if my daughter calls me or somebody calls me, I can get phone calls, but most people don't call anymore, but I won't get any I don't have notifications anyway on my phone, so I don't get notifications. This drove some people crazy at the beginning, especially some of my corporate clients are like, what do you mean you didn't see the message until, 3 hours later? But I operate that way. And that's another reason why they want to work with me. So the point that I'm making is that you don't have to do this all at once, but if you start just piecemeal being like, hey, what if I took notifications away just for a half hour while I concentrate on this thing? I write about this a little bit in my first book. How I went about this. And I think that just even, like I said, just even putting your phone aside for a little bit, even while you're doing something pleasurable, just don't look at it for a little bit. So you're learning to take your attention back, because like I said, your attention, it's like that laser beam. And if you can learn how to harness it, you will be a much more powerful human being. And even if you continue to do that, I continue to do that all the time, that work, because it's so powerful.
Thanks, Courtney. I just put your website in the chat. Folks, if you haven't had a chance to check out Courtney's book, it's really powerful and practical, and like really kind of these bite-sized chunks of inspiration. Also a great gift. And I can say that because I have many that I've gifted. Let's go to a question about habits. I know you work with lots of different clients, many of them, pretty senior level. And I'm just curious about like enduring habits and success stories. Like, what are folks taking away from their time with you? Like, what habits are you seeing people wanting to build towards? There's this great book, Atomic Habits, out there. I don't know if anyone's read it, but I'm a big fan. Just like, creating things that are really just built into the fabric of who you are and feel very natural and accessible. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on success stories related to habits.
Mm-hmm. there's also that great book. What is the name of that one? I haven't read Atomic Habits, and it's the third or fourth time I've heard it come up. So I think I have to read it. But you know that other one by Charles Duhigg? There's one by Charles Duhigg, and I think it's the power of habit. I think it's called The Power of Habit. And in that, he describes how we form habits, right? Because most of us don't even think that we have habits. And we say, I've heard so many people say, oh, I don't have the consistency, or I'm not able to stick with something, right? We hear that a lot. A lot of people believe that about themselves. But the fact is that they have habits. They just aren't as consciously aware that they form them because they're so habitual that they've actually just become part of who they are. And so they don't even think about them. And that's why most of the time too, we don't even start on a new habit, because when we start on a new habit, it's very uncomfortable. It is super uncomfortable to start a new habit, because it's a little bit like you're driving the same way to work every single day for 3 years. And you don't, right? How many people who are listening, like you drive and you maybe are multitasking while you drive? I mean, you're texting someone, or I've seen people put makeup on in their car. I'm like, how does she do that? She is amazing. Talking about the multitasking before, but we do these things, right? Where we're so used to doing them that we don't even think about them. And we can't actually, because we're in that different frequency, by the way, we can do other things because we're in a different frequency. We don't have to think about it. Now, imagine that you're doing that for 3 years, and then all of a sudden you take your car and you decide you're going to go a completely different route. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is that your brain's going to freak out a little bit, be like, whoa, mayday, mayday, Sally's taking a different route to work. What are we going to do here? We got to figure stuff out. She's going somewhere else. We don't know, blah, 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 and it's just freaking out, right? So that's what happens when we try to change and shift things up. But when we start to do it enough, we get used to that, and it becomes a new habit, and it becomes who we are. And I think people just, they don't get over that hump of that discomfort, that initial discomfort that is the same for everybody. When you start to do something new, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to feel a little discomfort, because your body's actually just saying, we're used to doing it this way. It works really well. Our autonomic nervous system's pretty calm when we do it that way. So let's just continue, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that whatever new habit you want to install, and you can do this with any new habit, and I'm telling you, anything you want to do, anything you want to learn, anything at all. The most important thing is for you to realize you're going to have that discomfort at the beginning. You're just going to have it. So you've got to just stick it out through that discomfort. And sometimes it'll take a little less time, and sometimes it'll take a little more. But just remember that if you're doing something really important, it's got to be a little bit like brushing your teeth. You're not going to leave your house if you haven't brushed your teeth, hopefully, right? It's the same thing with other habits, right? So the most powerful habit that I have seen for myself and other people is just getting quiet. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you meditate. I don't care if you go outside in nature and you just sit there and you hug a tree. I mean, that's awesome too. It doesn't matter. I think it was Pascal. It was Pascal who said, the mathematician and philosopher, he said, all men's problem, I'm sure he meant all of humanity's problem, stems from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And that's really it. The more you're able to connect with that, it's kind of scary at first, because you're connecting with parts of yourself maybe you don't want to see, maybe you don't want to look at, but the more you actually do that and you get quiet with yourself, again, the greater the likelihood you're going to start, not even the likelihood, the certainty that you will start moving into different frequencies, and you will start operating differently, and you will start seeing massive differences and a lot of magic in your life.
I love that. Okay, we've got about 6 minutes left, so we're going to go to one pointed question from the chat box that came in from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Giomara, and wondering about how you keep peace in an environment that's inherently toxic. So it's hard to remain positive when you're around toxicity, whether it's anger or people who are miserable or people who are addicted to like doom scrolling and all of these iterations of what can be toxic. So curious your thoughts on that.
I love this question. And there's the first thing that's coming to me in answer to your question, thank you, because it's such a beautiful question, is because it's so hard, right, when we're surrounded by stuff. And I remember times in my life where I felt like, this is it, this is all I get. But I also remembered, I learned a long time ago that, you basically are the sum of the people you spend the most time with. And I was like, well, who would I want to spend my time with? if I could choose, and in this moment, I feel like maybe I can't choose, but if I could choose, who would I spend the most of my time with? And I realized they were people that, for the most part, I didn't know at that point in my life. I mean, people who inspired me, people who left me feeling empowered, people who reminded me of that potential, of the potential that I held. Those were the people I wanted to spend time with. So what did I do? I got myself a Walkman, because this was like Walkman days. I mean, seriously, that's my era. And I would just listen to stuff. I would read everything I could. You have a library. You have a library inside of you, by the way. You literally are using 1% of your genetic expression right now. And you're not you, but most of us are taking out one book every single day, same book, like this is me, this is me, this is me. No, you have infinite probability outcomes available to you, infinite potentialities available to you. And the moment you will actually connect with the reminders of that, and it doesn't matter if it's in a book, if it's in a podcast, if it's in this, you go back to this recording, you listen to it. If it impacted you, go back. I've listened to certain things, I don't even know how many times. I've read books, I've read bricks of books multiple times, because every time I did it, I got some new insight, I got some new intuition, I got something that helped me move into a place of greater inspiration and greater empowerment. And so even if you're in an environment that feels really toxic, the more you actually just say, you know what, I can connect with anyone, anywhere, and that's what I'm going to choose. And you really just step outside of that, that environment. And I've done it. I've absented myself multiple times when I've been in situations with people who were, complaining, or they were talking about other people. Like, that's something I don't do. I just don't do those things anymore. I mean, long time ago, I used to do them, but I have a rule. I'm like, and if someone starts, I'm like, I have to go. I'll be back in a little bit, or whatever it is. Maybe you go to the bathroom. I was talking to someone yesterday. It was like, you just go up to the bathroom, just take your time. I mean, what's someone going to say? I got a bowel movement. I got to go, I mean, just get out of that situation in little doses at first, because it's hard at first, and then you'll see that grows, because as you start to change, again, as you start to get into a frequency and a vibrancy that doesn't match that, I'm telling you, I mean, my whole life changed when I started doing this work, and I just started all these amazing people started coming into my life. And it wasn't because I just, miraculously, I don't know, that I moved to Taos and I changed my name. It was because I actually just said, no, I'm actually going to decide. And again, this comes back to that power of choice, the very few things that you get to choose, which is really just who are you going to decide to be? You can't choose how other people are going to be. You can't choose how they're going to show up, and the level of sincerity or whatever. You can't choose any of that, but you can choose for yourself. And we're really, really lucky today, more than any other time, that we have access to so much empowering and beautiful information. So please take advantage of that. And as Sally said, this recording will be available, and I hope this is something that will continue to serve you. And I'll also continue to make an effort to put more things out there to the general public, because this has been really beautiful. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I'm just going to share a quick slide for folks to remind them to share this inspiration out. And I have too many screens open at the moment. There it is.
Is the only, she's actually, I don't know that she's entirely human, because she is actually the only person I've ever met who can be doing 50,000 things simultaneously. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm just going to show this slide because one thing that Technology Association of Oregon is about is not only tech-powered inspiration, but leveraging these platforms and also sharing some of the inspiration that you felt today out on social media. What a great way to share it with folks who weren't able to join. I'm just sharing some of the handles here for both the Florence Chamber, who is really the convener, but also for Cortney, where you can find her on social and her website. This is actually an image of her book. And thank you everyone for making the time to join. We invite you to share some of these inspirational nuggets. Bettina will be sharing out the recording to everyone who registered. And we'll see, Courtney, if we can get some of those quotes back to folks who asked for the direct quotes, because they are really powerful and want an engaged group. I'm definitely feeling inspired. I hope that all of my noontime sessions can be just this uplifting. And so thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. We hope to do something similar again.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all these beautiful comments. I loved being with all of you. I wish I could see you. This is what I miss about the stage. I want to see all of you. I want to give you all hugs. This is my hugs to you. I love you. Thank you for joining us. Bye, Flor. Ciao, Bella. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Is it time to end?
Oh, I know. It's so great because
I don't want to cut off the chat. I love reading these messages.
And Bettina, I wanted to hear you say goodbye. I was waiting for you to chime in. I'm glad you're back.
Yeah, what a wonderful an hour to spend. You know, we talk about spending time or investing time, and this was time well invested. So,
Absolutely.
and I just don't want to turn it off because I'm loving seeing the chat messages.
I know, they're beautiful.
What a great and engaged group, really, honestly.
Very,
you,
very
guys.
inspirational. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'll turn it off now. Bye, everybody.
Grazie.
Bye,
Ciao.
everybody.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.